Right. So, hello again, and today is our um, last but one lecture. I still owe you one lecture, which I think I'm going to record because we have no time for me to compensate for it. So I think I'm just going to record it at home and put it on my YouTube channel. So if you want, you will be able to watch it later. But this is our penultimate meeting. And today I wanted to pass on to the new level of stylistic analysis to the text, to the level of text. But before we go on to that, I wanted to finish the topic, which I think is still very important. This is about the expressive vocabulary, the expressive means of the language on the lexical level. This is the slide. This is a slide that you saw earlier on in my lectures, and it explains the difference between stylistic devices and expressive means, right? By which we understand phonetic, lexical, grammatical forms which exist in the language, in the system of the language, for emotional or logical intensification or modification of the utterance. So they are these ready-made beauty, things of beauty in the language, which we take, we borrow, and we use it in our speech, and it automatically becomes expressive, right? Automatically. And unfortunately, there is no time for me to look at the different levels at the lexical, at the phonetic level and at the syntactical level. But I decided to devote a couple of minutes to lexical expressive means, and we started it last time. So the usual, most frequently cited examples of expressive means on the lexical level are synonyms and antonyms, and among them especially words of emotion and assessment. Эмотивная и оценочная лексика, right? So the vocabulary of emotion and of assessment. That means that this vocabulary holds these connotations inside the meaning of these words without the necessity to invent anything, right? So the emotive or the emotional connotation, the emotive or the assessment evaluative connotation is already there in the semantics of these words. It's in the dictionary meaning, right? In the dictionary meaning of these words. Such words as animated, electrified, exuberant, magnanimous, gracious, benevolent. So all these nice, beautiful words which imply some assessment or emotion, they are there for us to borrow and make our speech more expressive. One more subtype of lexical expressive means are the words of concrete language, which describe some concrete specific things. Why are they expressive? Because they usually carry with them some image. They carry some image. Thirdly, these are the imagery words per se, the imagery words as such. They are the sensory language. So the words which describe things related to our senses, what we can feel, see, hear, touch, smell in the story through the words. So the words which have a very bright imagery component in their semantic structure. Laughter-stench world, things like that. And finally, idioms and catchphrases. So idioms are usually rather bright as well. They also very often carry some sort of image. That's why, and especially they carry a dynamic image when something happens, right? And they're useful when you want to emphasize something, to make, again, to add expression to your speech. Well, this is again a slide which I showed you in my first lecture, and it illustrates the use of specific language, of concrete language, to demonstrate how expressive it makes your utterance. Instead of saying, he walked into the room and said, this is what I was waiting for. You describe this if you add some concrete language, so strolled or marched or shuffled into the room, right? And you get completely different pictures, muttered, barked, and sobbed, and you get completely different emotive environments in which something is happening. Now, this is something that I haven't shown you, although maybe last time we came as far as this point, but in any case, the examples are slightly different. So these are the imagery, the sensory language proper. So the words related to the five senses: visual, seeing, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Only the weathercock on the spire of the neighboring church is a flame of fire. And we can immediately see this, right? Because these are the words which have this imagery component. I walked through the forest, crunching the leaves underfoot, right? Шелестя листьями под ногами. A tangle of the sea smell and of weeds and damp, new plowed earth. Sometimes, there will be a group in this year where they will get, for their final test, they will get a poem which the effect of which relies not on stylistic devices, not on metaphors, not on metonymies. It relies mostly on the use of the expressive vocabulary. So you have to feel what you can see, hear, smell, and touch. Taste. We sip our coffee, very small sips for me, and she wants to know everything I've done today. Right, that's taste. And partly smell. Touch. My fingers stretch out, finding only the rough canvas cover of the mattress. Right? These are the words which make us feel the rough canvas cover of the mattress. So these are the words appealing to our senses, And of course, if they're simple and primitive, like lemon, right? If I say it was lemony taste, you can imagine it yourselves. But of course, if the image is more sophisticated, then it relies on the experience of the reader, because if you have never been to the sea, you will hardly imagine the sea smell and the smell of the weeds, right? So in a way, of course, this sensory language is better understood by those who have a wider experience. Now, two more sophisticated examples of imagery is synesthesia. We talked about that when we talked about synesthesia in metaphor, synesthetic metaphorical epithets. That's when input from various senses works together. Oh, my love's like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love's like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. And here we have input from all five senses: seeing, red, red rose; smelling, rose; melody played in tune, that's hearing; and sweet, that's taste, right? Four senses. There is no sense of touch, although, of course, when we say the rose, we think about the thorns, right? In a way, it does contain the touch component as well. And organic. Organic, this is a type of image, well, one of the terms which is used for an overall feeling. When it is difficult to specify whether this is hearing or seeing or touching, not any of our five senses, is the overall feeling of our body. It may be something like fear, right, which concerns many of our systems. Or, for example, the overall feeling of fever or temperature. It's hot, humid, muggy, the typical Memphis July, right? Muggy, душный. And this is an image, definitely, which we can see, feel, hear, but it's difficult to say what it is. Bask in springtime's golden hours. Bask means купаться в лучах солнца. So it is basking in springtime's golden hours in the sun, right? Soaking in the sun. This is an overall organic feeling. Any questions? No. And of course, poets and writers use these words usually in a complex to convey an atmosphere. And the more unique this atmosphere is, the more masterly we think the author is, the better he manages to convey this feeling. His room was simply furnished, a double bed in some rather clumsy rural attempt at an empire style, a walnut wardrobe riddled with worm, поточенный червячком, a chair, an old chaise longue with tired green upholstery, right? This image, a gilt mirror, stains on the mercury. It's an old mirror with stains from old age on the glass. The room smelt faintly musty, zatchly, seldom used, furnished out of local auctions. Right? So the images can vary in the degree of their complexity, of course, right? From simple images to some rather very complicated images. Now, as I showed it last time, but for completeness sake, I'll show it here as well, that sensory language may create the setting or may help to create the setting, and of course the mood. Like sometimes their combination can be different. For example, the desert and the mood is determined. This comes from BBC bite-sized GCSE website, teaching children to write creatively. The sand burned, the dust stung, but we marched on regardless, right? All these images help to create this. Mountains, the setting, the mood is hopeful. Small white cloudlets hovered so close to our heads, we felt we could touch them. Hovered means, hovered, парили, парили над головой. The sand burned, the dust stung, жалили, кусался этот песок. Regardless, несмотря ни на что. Right. The setting is the beach, the mood is excited. Crabs scuttled hither and thither. Children squealed in delight. Hither and thither. Туда-сюда. Крабы шастали туда-сюда. And children squealed, пищали, in delight. Right, and we can imagine it, right? So I think this is an important topic because this is also partly because it is so much usable in the pedagogical context. This is something that we can readily use to teach children to write. Right, creative writing is one of the exercises would be to teach. Well, write something you can see and describe it. Describe something you can hear or something you can touch. Well, this is an example of how this may work in a poem, the sensory language. And this is a good example of a poem which doesn't have metaphors. This is not based on stylistic devices. This is purely based on the sensory language by William Carlos Williams, an outstanding American poet. A very famous poem, by the way. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. Nothing, right? It's just the sensory language of the words, right? This is just that I eat, so the plums, icebox, sweet and cold, and we get the picture, right? This is a minimalist poem. Well, idioms. I unfortunately haven't prepared an extensive description of how idioms can be used. Well, you may read a chapter in Galperin if you like, although of course some of the idioms might be slightly old nowadays. But still, as I said, Galperin is an unsurpassed so far textbook in stylistics. These are two examples from from newspapers. Megan adds dramatically, I wasn't being thrown to the wolves, I was being fed to the wolves. Well, you remember Megan, Harry's wife. She keeps trying to make people believe that she was discriminated against in the royal family. She accuses them of racism just because somebody asks what color the skin of her child is going to be. And because of that, she says she was fed to the wolves. A bit exaggerated, I think. But if this is an example of how a cliche or how an idiom can be used, and moreover, how it can be deconstructed to add new meaning. The government has closed the stable door after the horse has bolted on migration, Camilla Tomini argues. Правительство закрыло дверь в конюшню после того, как лошадь убежала. Right, meaning that they should have done something about migration a long time ago. Now it may be too long. There are so many migrants in the country. Right, so that's where I draw the line under all our lexical expressive means and stylistic devices. Do you have any questions? No. If not, that we move on to our next level. You remember the phonetic level, the lexical level, the syntactical level, and well, we skipped the morphological level. And again, for lack of time and space. But now we pass on to the next level. There are arguments, theoretical arguments among linguists, whether there exists a textual level in the language or whether it is just an extension of the syntactical level, right? Because, well, what are the units of language? It's a phoneme, a morpheme, a word, and a sentence, essentially, right? What can be more than a sentence? Even a text is a collection of sentences. However, there are also scholars who argue that it is also a qualitatively new level, right? When several sentences come together, they form something new, something which is not yet there in the sentence. Well, and in any case, there is an area of linguistics which may be called the linguistics of text, linguistica texta, textual linguistics. And this is something that contains some useful observations about the structure of text, about types of text. And I think it is useful in stylistics because, well, after all, stylistics from these small segments, from small text, it grows on to literature, right? To literature criticism. And next time, again, to look at some of the rules of organization of a literary work. And today we're going to concentrate first on the basic ideas of text and the basic properties of what text is. We'll start with the etymology of the word text, which comes from the Latin word fabric, ткань. The Russian word ткань, ткать, and the Latin word text actually have the same root, right? So text is something which is woven, соткано, right? Textus. And for example, if we take Quintilian, a famous Roman Latin rhetorician, orator, he says, after you have chosen your words, they must be weaved together into a fine and delicate fabric. And where we have in English, where we have the word fabric, in Latin stands the word text, right? Textus. So textus means fabric. Then if we go on to the easiest, simplest definition of what text text is. A text is a sequence of sentences that display mutual dependence. A sequence of sentences that display mutual dependence. Sequence of sentences that display mutual dependence. And now let's talk about two characteristics that a text has, or that a text must have. And this is something which a sentence does not have as such. Or it does have, but on a much different scale. The ties that bind a text together are often referred to as cohesion, right? Cohesion. In Russian, cohesion is translated as когезия, либо связность. Когезия, она же связность. Cohesion. So what provides cohesion? What helps to bind sentences together in a sentence? There are 5 types of cohesive relationships. And the first one of them is the conjunctive relations. And this is what we generally know by linking words. They are explicit relations between what goes first and second by notions of contrast, result, and time. Explicit relations, what goes first and second by notions of contrast, result, and time. First, we'll go to the C. Lastly, there's the question of cost. I left early. However, Jean stayed till the end. However is contrast, right? And it links the second sentence to the first one. They help us see that this is not an isolated sentence, but that that this sentence comes in a row. Can I go on? Okay. Second one, co-reference and repetition. Co-reference is a difficult term which means сореференциальность, соотнесенность. Features that cannot be semantically interpreted without referring to some other feature in the text. Most often, this is about pronouns. Pronouns, because they refer to the same thing as some of the previous nouns refers. Several people approached. They seemed angry. If we just take the second sentence, it won't be clear, right? Only if it is referred to the previous one. And it provides cohesion. Several people approached. They seemed angry. Listen to this. John's getting married. Or simply repetition. Repetition is also a type of co-reference. I found a key. The key was old and rusty. So on the one hand, there is this the definite article, which refers you again to some prior information. But secondly, it's just the word itself, right? A key, the key. And the two types of relationships in co-reference and repetition are anaphoric and cataphoric. The ones which refer you to some previous sentences in the text, they are anaphoric. And the ones which refer you to some post-going, after-going sentence, elements in the text. So for example, they is anaphoric, it refers you to people. This is cataphoric, it refers you to the fact of John getting married. And I find a key, the key, so the key is anaphoric. Anaphoric. Is it clear? Right, so we had conjunctive relations, co-reference and repetition. The third, the fourth, and the fifth are lexical relationships. When in several sentences, or at least in 2 sentences, we have words which are lexically related to each other. For example, they're synonyms, or they are hyponyms, гиперогипонимические отношения, да, когда там собака, бультерьер. Это гиперогипонимические отношения. Стая, ворона. Это коллективное и частное. So the flowers were lovely. She liked the tulips best. And the word tulips is related to the word flower. Flowers. Again, this is hyponic relationships. Then comparison also provides cohesion. That house was bad. This one is far worse. The word worse refers you to bad in the first sentence. Comparison, by its very fact, by its very existence, presence, it provides this cohesion. And finally, ellipsis. Ellipsis in itself is a cohesive element because it refers you cannot understand the sentence without some previous knowledge. Where did you see the car? In the street. Where do you see the car? In the street. You saw this. I saw it in the street. Instead of saying this, we just omit it, and that provides text cohesion. So once again, lexical relationships, comparison, ellipsis, coreference and repetition, and conjunctive relations. These are five instruments of text cohesion. Now, look at this text. A week has 7 days. Every day I feed my cat. Cats have 4 legs. The cat is on the mat. Mat has 3 letters. Is it text? On the one hand, it is, because it is cohesive, right? Every sentence is linked to the previous one by means of repetition, coreference, so it is ideally linked together. However, it is not a text, right, in the full understanding, because it doesn't contain coherence, and this is the second type of relations in the text, the second type of ties which hold the text together. They are the inner ties, the continuity of senses, смысла, of logic, something that makes a text meaningful. In Russian it is когерентность. Та была когезия, связанность, это когерентность. So the text must have not only the outer cohesion, but also the inner coherence. Coherence. Такое ощущение, что здесь сидят только мои группы. А есть кто-то из третьей группы здесь? О, есть, хорошо. А из четвертой? А, из четвертая моя, да. Пятая. Ага, один человек. Шестая. Шестая отсутствует. Седьмая, ну седьмую я вижу, да. Ой, all right. So, do you have any questions about cohesion and coherence? No. So again, in teaching, we must bear that in mind, right? That these are, well, main categories of text: cohesion and coherence. And when we assess, when we read the text written by students, of course, it is useful to bear in mind. Now, there are frequent types of text by instruments of cohesion, which are classified by instruments of cohesion. Partly it correlates with what I have just told you, but this is like a slightly different view on cohesion and on types of text. These are the types of text which are frequently taught in English universities and schools. So the 5 types of text, frequent types of text, are description, sequence, comparing, contrasting, cause and effect, problem and solution. So description is often introduced by cohesive elements like, for example, characteristics are, such as, looks like, consists of, for instance, most important. Then sequence. Sequence can be about narration, can be about events, It can be about recommendations, could be about advice. The main thing is that there is a sequence. First, second, third, simultaneously following, finally, at last, in the end. Compare and contrasting. Differs from, similar to, in contrast, alike, same as well as, either, not only, but also, yet, although, best, fewest, tallest. So on the one hand, it can be explicitly shown or with the help of simple comparison. And the fourth and the fifth are cause and effect and problem and solution. So the reasons why, reasons for, if, then, as a result of, caused by, outcome, impact, influenced by, and finally problem and solution. The problem, the dilemma, the puzzle, because, since, this led to, the main difficulty. Therefore, these are frequent text types. Frequent text types. Cause and effect, problem and solution, description, sequence, and comparing, contrasting. Any questions? No. Good. 3 more terms for us today about text analysis, and they are coupling, convergence, and defeated expectancy. This is closer to stylistics because it is about how stylistic devices and expressive means provide cohesion apart from those types instruments of cohesion that we have discussed so far. So coupling in Russian is сцепление. Сцепление. And these are various types of cohesion which relies on the appearance of similar elements in similar position. So basically repetition of some form or idea on the phonetic, lexical, or syntactical level. Repetition of the same type of idea, of the same form or idea on the phonetic, lexical, or syntactical levels. So that means stitching together the text, stitching the text together by forms of stylistic devices. For example, on the phonetic level, alliteration, assonance, consonants, rhyme, rhythm, and meter, all of them provide coupling, right? For example, if you have rhyme, it couples or it sort of stitches together parts of the text. Assonance, it also stitches together various words. Alliteration stitches together various words. Semantic coupling, synonyms, antonyms, root repetition, periphrasis, sustained metaphor. It is also a type of coupling, right? It's interesting. Well, what I like, why I decided to introduce this term to you, although it is slightly boring, I decided to introduce it because I think it is useful. It really shows you that, for example, sustained metaphor, продолженная метафора, stitches the text together like alliteration, right? So being in essence very different things, both of them provide coupling in the text, you see? Or parallel constructions, chiasmus. So all of these things being on various levels of language, they nevertheless perform the same function, stitching together the text, coupling. Is it clear? Good. Convergence. Well, one phrase for you to put down. Coupling facilitates remembering. That's true. Coupling facilitates remembering. This is the function. Well, maybe the most prominent function of cognitive function of coupling. And the second term is convergence, convergencia. That means that's slightly different to coupling, although of course it employs the same sort of stylistic devices and expressive means. Convergence means when you combine several elements, several stylistic devices. One of them may be on the lexical level, another on the phonetic level, one more on the syntactical level, but with the same aim. So you want to achieve one aim, and to achieve it, you use a big arsenal of stylistic devices. So when you use stylistic devices with one purpose, and they all конвергируют, сливаются вместе, участвуют в чем-то. Right? Combination of stylistic devices. It focuses the reader's attention on the particular significant parts of the text. Let me give you an example. Do you remember To the Men of England by Shelley? And you remember that it is mostly written in trochee. And first it is made up of rhetorical questions. Wherefore plow for the Lord's yellow, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly in the middle of the poem, the poet markedly, noticeably changes the way he writes the poem. He shifts from trochee into I am, and he starts using direct imperative sentences, right? Sow seed, but let no tyrant reap. Find wealth, let no impostor heap, and so on and so forth. So what does he use? He uses spondy, which he hadn't used much before, right? Sow seed, find wealth. Simultaneously, he uses the imperative mood, right? Sow seed, find wealth. He uses alliteration, sow seed, right? He uses abusive synonyms for the Lord, tyrant, impostor, idle. He concentrates them all in one and the same stanza. And he also uses negation 3 times, right? No tyrant, no import, let not the idle wear. He uses this antithesis, right? When he speaks about the workers and then the lords. He uses parallel constructions to repeat the same idea 3 times or even 4 times. And he uses gradation when he goes from the peaceful things like seed and wealth to arms, right? And he does all of that with one stylistic function, to heat up the workers against their oppressors and make them rebel. This is what convergence is, right? He uses multiple stylistic devices from various levels in order to achieve one stylistic effect. Is it clear what convergence is? Good. And finally, defeated expectancy, эффект обманутого ожидания. Well, it relies on the fact that the usual arrangement of the text prepares the reader for the consequential and logical development of ideas. This is like the default construction of the text. It is logical. And usually the text is based on predictability. It means that when something new appears in the text, it is prepared by the preceding arrangement of the elements. And defeated expectancy breaks this predictability. And when this unpredictable element appears, it catches the reader's eye. Right? So defeated expectancy, when you expect something, but it doesn't happen. And what is usually based on the effect of defeated expectancy are different types of wordplay. Puns, zeugmas, paradoxes. Why is paradox so paradoxical? I'm sorry for the pun, right? It is because we don't expect the second part as it is. We don't expect it to contradict what was said in the first part. And this is defeated expectancy. Irony, pun, zeugma, paradox, oxymoron, other types of wordplay, they're based on defeated expectancy. Defeated expectancy. And of course, well, detective stories are based on defeated expectancy. We don't expect some nice-looking gentleman or lady to be the bad guys. And one more example where it is, well, it's a play on words. This is a famous poem about November. Unfortunately, no time and no place here to read it all, but believe me, it is all made up like the first 4 or 5 lines. They negate everything which disappears in autumn. Nothing happens. No sun, no moon, no morn, no noon, no dawn, no dusk, no proper time of day, no sky, no earthly view, no distance looking blue. I advise you all to read it the whole of it. It's a very nice poem. No fruit, and finally it ends with no fruits, no flowers, no leaves, no birds, November, right? And this Vember is, of course, defeated expectancy because we expect a separate word. And instead of that comes the second part of the word November, right? Which in its turn sort of makes us think that no in November is this negation because there is nothing summer-like in autumn. Right, and now we are ready to go on to regard the text structure. Of course, the minimum size of a text is one sentence. Even it could be as little, as small as just one word, right? If we just say smirkalis, the evening, that's a text in itself. But the usual unit of a text is not a sentence. The usual unit of a text is a paragraph, right? A paragraph. I'm sure that you all know the structure, the typical structure of a typical paragraph. Do you? Well, I'm sure that you know that a typical paragraph, a good paragraph, must contain a topical sentence, right? A topic sentence. What is a topic sentence? Eh? The thesis. Well, this is the abstract, the idea that you want to speak about in its most general way, right? So for example, if you want to speak about, I don't know, um, whether students must have mobiles in class or whether they shouldn't, you start with mobile phones provide a lot of interruption during class. This is a very general statement. And then you go on with sentences which support it, right? So support or vice versa. Well, usually support your thesis, right? So you can illustrate, you can give an example of some particular student who interrupted the lesson with something. You can give statistics and you can say, oh, well, in 60% of schools, the performance of students has dropped because they use mobile phones. Or you can use some emotive arguments and say, children are almost losing their good eyesight because of smartphones. So you provide arguments, illustrations, statistics. You can provide figures of speech. So you develop this general idea. This is the structure of a typical paragraph, right? And then when you are done with this idea, you pass on to the next idea. And then you have your own, it has its own next topical sentence, right? The general sentence. And by the way, this is very important. When you learn to write yourselves, when you read, it is very important that this logic is preserved, right? Topic sentence, then the arguments. Or it could be different. It could be first come the supportive sentences, and finally, in the end, you have the topic sentence. This is also a legitimate structure of a paragraph, right? Which makes it easy to read. Well, of course, paragraphs can be different, but usually this is the usual logical structure of a paragraph, right? Something general and some specific things. And then the next paragraph has to be related to the previous one. And the next sentence, the next paragraph to the previous one as well. Now, if we add paragraph to paragraph to paragraph, what do we get? So what do we get? What are paragraphs divided into? Into chapters or parts, right? Depending on the type of text. So it has a bigger division, right? Part or chapter. Part or chapter. So paragraphs are arranged into parts or chapters. What are chapters arranged into? Into a volume, right? Into a volume. into a volume. Now, usually a text which is made up of several paragraphs, or of course, which is made up of several chapters, must have a title. A title, in a way, is also a prerequisite. It's a feature of a text. What else can a text have? It can have an epigraph, right? An epigraph, which is a text which refers it to some previous text. A text may have commentaries written in the same volume or later, and which are also related to this text. And both of them, well, things like epigraph, commentaries, stage directions, сценические указания, they're called metatext. Metatext. То есть околотекст, from the Greek prefix meta. Metatext. Epigraph, commentaries, they're metatext. What else can the text have? Usually, any text has an introduction and a conclusion, or they can be called a prologue and an epilogue. If it is a novel, for example, right? A prologue or an epilogue, the introduction and the conclusion. How else can we expand this text? We can write several volumes. And when we have written 3 volumes, what do we write next? A prequel or a sequel, right? Well, it's very difficult to say what is the biggest single connected text by one author. Well, maybe it is the War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. It might also be, well, The Lord of the Rings, right, by Tolkien. It might be Harry Potter, which contains 7 volumes. Right? It's difficult to say. Well, some people said the Bible in the previous group, but the Bible is, although they are connected books, but nevertheless, they are different books, right? For example, if we take Genesis and Exodus, they are, of course, connected. The first 5 books of the Old Testament. The first 4 books of the New Testament, they're also connected, right? Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles. But then the epistles, they are slightly different. So it's difficult to say whether we regard that as one big text or as several texts. But in any case, this is like a structure of a text, how it can grow, right? Paragraphs, chapters, volumes, metatext, various types of metatext, sequel and prequel. So this is the same, just in the linear form, right? So the structure of text. However, if we add text to text and to text, and if we regard it all in context, appears discourse. I don't know whether you are familiar with this term, discourse. This is a very difficult term, and it lies not only within the precincts of linguistics itself, but also on the borderline with social linguistics. Because discourse is the sequence of texts which exist in context. We spoke of metatext, but there is also context for any text, right? Context for any text. And there appears discourse. What is discourse? There are more than 10 definitions to the term discourse, but we'll start with the definition by Natalia Rutyunova. And this is that it is text plus extra-linguistic, pragmatic, social-cultural, psychological, and other factors. So the text in a situation. And it's not only a written text. That's any result of your speech act. When you say something, you produce a text which can be regarded as discourse. And I immensely like her definition of discourse, I think, because I think it is spot on. This is speech or text immersed into life, Речь, погруженная в жизнь. This is what discourse is. Текст, погруженный в жизнь. So the text and everything around it. The text and everything around it. Then comes my definition. Well, don't regard it very seriously, but I think it still holds some water. That discourse is chains of texts where ideas recur. Chains of texts, and you see it's here, right? Chains of texts where ideas recur. Plus, of course, their context, right? Plus their context. What does it mean? Well, if you think of how you yourselves produce text, you will see that you produce texts from time to time, which are connected, stitched together by your own ideas, your values, things that you value, treasure, or not, right? Things that you are angry about. So these are your texts which recycle your ideas from time to time. You develop your ideas, right? Then you produce new ideas. So if you take all of this, chains of texts, you get your own personal discourse. And now if you take several people who express similar ideas, you get the discourse of some group of people. And this is where we come to Michel Foucault's definition that discourse presents systems of thoughts composed of ideas, attitudes, courses of action, beliefs, and practices that systematically construct the subjects and the worlds of which they speak. So systems of thoughts composed of ideas, attitudes, courses of action, beliefs, and practices that systematically construct the subjects and the worlds of which they speak. What does it mean? It means that discourses are capable of building pictures of reality, right? Discourses, in a way, they are pictures of reality. That means that they borrow elements of this overall reality and construct their own images, their own, well, sort of selections of reality. And this is what is called discourse. So that means that there may be several discourses, right? Several texts. They exist in one context. And there is another set of texts which exist in a different context, slightly different context. And they provide two different types of discourse. Different types of discourse. What I'm driving at is that, well, that's a very interesting thing. And of course it requires more time. And this is about the different types of discourse, which inevitably contain elements. Whenever you produce a text within a discourse, it is connected with all these previous systems of text produced within the same discourse. That's why very often people nowadays speak of the liberal discourse or of the totalitarian discourse, so things like that. And they can create their own pictures of the same reality, right? And they can describe the same country as a paradise or as Mordor, right? It depends on which discourse you're in, right? As the Elfland or the Mordor. And it may be very often the same thing, the same country, the same place, which is viewed through different discourses. As a result, nowadays, there appear echo chambers. Do you know what an echo chamber is? Camera echo. Well, if you think of what you read on the internet, then fiction, we tend, well, we begin with reading many things, but then we start to like certain things and disregard other things. If we go on reading people of the same opinion as we are, we end up in a room, figuratively speaking, where everybody keeps saying things which are the same, which belong to the same discourse, right? And this is called the echo chamber, camera echo, where you can only hear voices that repeat the things that you are used to, right? And this is one of the risks and hazards of today's media communication, is that it's so easy for us when we exist in virtual reality to end up in an echo chamber, reading only the things that we are interested in. Well, and if you, well, there are such, in echo chambers, as in different discourses, you can find discourse markers. So the words or the concepts which are characteristic, telling for this discourse, and which are shared by people who share the same discourse. For example, corruption, human rights, dictatorship, democracy, peaceful protest, conservative. These are all typical of what kind of discourse in Russia? The liberal discourse. Or for example, who uses the word автозак? Liberals. Conservatives almost don't use it, right? Well, for various reasons. If you see somebody using the word автозак, this is most likely liberal. And vice versa. Foreign agents, liberals, Western values, depravity, развращенность. This is the discourse, these are the discourse markers of conservatives, right? This is something that liberals don't very often speak about. So what I wanted to show you is that, well, text goes on, right? Goes on developing into bigger things like discourses, right? Which are series of texts. And now if we go on, we'll get even to a bigger picture. We'll see that all texts that exist in this world, they are connected. All texts which exist in this world, they are connected, directly or indirectly, because, well, with the timeline, right? All texts exist, people read them, and in response to them, very often inspired by these texts, people write their own texts. People write their own texts. And what we come to is the notion of intertextuality. Intertextuality is the shaping, it's the shaping of a text's meaning by another text, essential for its interpretation. The shaping of a text's meaning by another text, essential for its interpretation. Or if we regard it simply, its reference to another text. But it is based on the philosophical concept, on the philosophy of Mikhail Bakhtin, a famous Russian philosopher and linguist whose ideas were very eagerly supported in the West, followed by Julia Kristeva, who introduced this term of intertextuality. So Bakhtin said, he made this brilliant observation that all texts are in dialogues. They appear as a dialogue to some previous text, some prior text. Texts appear as if they are replies in dialogue to some previous texts. Because people are inspired by some ideas and they want either to agree or to disagree or both, and to say something new compared to what has already been said. So in a way, we deal with this universe of texts, right? Universe of texts, all of which are connected to each other. So in a way, this is a model of how texts exist. Well, the internet is a very good model, right? When we click a hyperlink and it leads us to a hypertext, right? And if we just project it into, not only in space, but also in time, we'll see that each text contains hyperlinks to previous texts, right? And it only depends on our, well, expertise, on our knowledge, how much we recognize, how much we recognize. A very interesting example of intertextuality of an intertext is a novel by Milorad Pavic, The Dictionary of the Khazars, Khazarski словарь. I regard it as a, well, as a very good example of what intertextuality is, because this is a novel written in the form of a dictionary. So there is no uniform text. You cannot start reading from the beginning. You open it and it's a dictionary, but it's a novel because when you read the entries in this dictionary, they start telling you a story, and they have references to cross-references to some other dictionary entries. You can start reading this novel from any point, from any dictionary entry, even from the end. But then if you follow these cross-references, you will read the whole novel as such. A very interesting example of intertextuality. And this brings us to the well-known stylistic device called the allusion. It's a reference within a literary work to another work of fiction, a film, a piece of art, or even a real event. Or another definition, it's a figure of speech that makes a reference to people, places, events, literary works, myths, or works of art, prior or contemporary, either directly or by implication. And usually an allusion is this elusive, implied reference when the people don't you directly. Don't tell you directly. This is from Hamlet. But when they say something like to celebrate or not to celebrate, right? This is an allusion to Hamlet. So reference to people, places, events, literary works, myths, by implication. By implication. This is an allusion proper. Well, most often allusions are made to the Bible, right? As the foundation books of the European literature. And well, the allusions can come in various forms, not only in books, but also, for example, this is the name of a musical. An American musical, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Иосиф и его удивительно разноцветный плащ снов. And of course, this is based on an allusion to the book of Genesis and the story of patriarch Joseph, who had a multicolor tunic, had multicolored clothes, which appears in the story of his of his kidnapping and selling to Egypt. This is from the film The Beautiful Mind. The prodigal roommate arrives, Charles said. What does prodigal mean? Блудный. Блудный сосед по комнате. And this is an allusion, of course, to the prodigal son. Then from Tribute, which all of us read, dignity is so much less than simple faith that it is unable to move even one mountain. And this is an allusion to the biblical saying that faith can move mountains. If you have faith as small as a seed, you can move a mountain. Well, lots of other literature works have been regarded as precedent works. That means the works to which further works refer or allude. Well, these are two examples from The Guardian, from a newspaper. Choosing between Microsoft and Google must seem like sailing between Scylla and Charybdis for Yahoo, said Krista Quarles. So Scylla and Charybdis, that's a reference, an allusion to the Odyssey, right. Then she flashed us that minxy Cheshire cat grin over her shoulder and was gone. That's an allusion to Alice in Wonderland. This is an allusion to 1984 by George Orwell, right? Nowadays, literature, well, has been passing recently through the stage of postmodernism, if you know this movement. And postmodernism is very heavily reliant on allusion and intertextuality as a method and as a dominant stylistic device. Well, for example, a play by Tom Stoppard, a famous playwright, modern playwright. One of his plays is called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Who are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? Hamlet's friends. Yeah, very well. We in quotes, right? Well, I'll remind you. It's when Hamlet's stepfather wants to kill him, he sends him to his vassal, the King of England, on a ship together with his friends, and he gives the friends a sealed letter in which he says that somebody who gives this letter to the king must be killed. So when the English king would open the letter, he sees that Hamlet gives him the letter, and he would kill Hamlet. But Hamlet finds out about the contents of this letter, and he manages to escape just before the ship departs. And his friends, who were hired by the king, by his stepfather, to keep him and to prevent him from escaping, they travel to the King of England with this letter alone. And you can guess what will happen to them when they hand over this letter. And Stoppard begins and makes the central characters of his play, not Hamlet, but Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They are the central figures, characters of this play of his. So this is what intertextuality is, right? Not on the level of the title, but also on the level of the plot. Ulysses by James Joyce alludes to where? To Odyssey, right? Because Ulysses is the Latin name for Odyssey. A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway seems as if it is just a farewell to arms, but in fact, this is an allusion to the book of Isaiah, who said, Isaiah, книга Исаии пророка, who says that in the end of times, at the end of times, a lion will graze together with a lamb. There will be no wars, and people will beat their arms, their swords into plowshares. Люди перекуют мечи на орала, то есть перекуют мечи в плуги, into peaceful use. And this is an allusion to the book of Isaiah, farewell to arms, saying goodbye to arms. So it's just a small glimpse into what intertextuality is, and for us to appreciate how much depends, how much of the effect of understanding text and admiring the beauty of text depends on the ability to understand the allusions. Well, even on the simple level of reading a newspaper. This is a recent article from the Telegraph. How Amazon stole Christmas from the failing Royal Mail. And we see a heap of Amazon boxes, and on top of them a small box of the Royal Mail. Now, and this green hand and this structure stole Christmas from. It's an allusion to, yes, to a popular film, How Grinch Stole Christmas, which I haven't seen myself. But now I can appreciate that. When people told me about this film, I could appreciate the allusion. Recently, have you heard that recently a book was published called Endgame? about Harry and Meghan and about racism, alleged racism in the royal family. Well, I don't know whether we've heard that or not. I think this is part of this effort of Harry and Meghan to hurt the royal family. But still, in the film, the author labels Kate Middleton Stepford-like royal wife. And when I read it, I did not understand it because there is this Stepford-like royal wife, which I did not understand. So this is an allusion, of course. And I Googled for that and I discovered that this is an allusion to a film, 1974 adaptation of a bestseller book about the Stepford wives who were robots and who were very submissive. They did not do things of their own. So they were very much uniform and only performing the functions, right? And this is, of course, the allusion which helps us to realize a modern text about Kate Middleton. Well, allusions can be made not only to books, but also to history. For example, again, from The Guardian, MPs coordinate efforts to limit Henry VIII powers by forcing government to make concessions or risk humiliating defeat. This is not an extract from a newspaper from the 16th century. This is 1919 or something. Henry VIII powers, that's an allusion to Henry VIII, who had absolute power. And Henry VIII powers in modern context are the powers that give politicians the power to make new laws bypassing the government, the parliament, bypassing parliament, right? For example, for the ministers, for the prime minister to make laws bypassing the parliament, bypassing parliament, and this is now called Henry VIII powers. There was something preternaturally grave about her, almost Victorian. Unless you know what girls in the Victorian era looked like and were and behaved like, you will not be able to understand this sentence. She hesitated a moment as if she knew she was being too cool or sibylline. Who were sibyls, bless you? In ancient Rome, sibyls were keepers of the hearth of goddess of hopes of home of something, and they were not allowed to marry until they were 40. Yes, they had to be virgins, and Sibylline in this case. So they were sort of priestesses, pagan priestesses of that goddess, and Sibylline means too unapproachable. Allusions can be made to art as well. Again, from The Guardian, an extract. I think that this picture of hundreds of locals and tourists crossing the Grand River looked a bit Bruegelian. That's a description of St. Petersburg, and this is the Neva River. And the author, who is probably a travel blogger, wrote, I think that this picture of hundreds of locals and tourists crossing the Grand River looked a bit Bruegelian. And this is a reference, of course, to the favorite style of Bruegel, Dutch or Flemish uh, landscape painter. So here at the bottom, you can see pictures by Bruegel with small figures of people somewhere in the distance and the confusion. And you see why the author made a reference, right, an allusion to Bruegel, because in a way this resembles Bruegelian pictures. Well, this example that we regarded in our seminars recently, her life was like the past of this old Moorish city, full, deep, remote. His own life as yet such a baby of a thing, hopelessly ignorant and innocent. For us to be able to fully appreciate this image, we have to recognize this reference to Moorish architecture and to the Moorish history. For example, these are typical Moorish motifs in Spanish architecture, right? And these ones, so her Moorish past was as mystical, mysterious, intricate, beautiful, and difficult to imagine as this Moorish architecture of Spanish cities. Well, one more type of of allusion, but a direct allusion, is when we take words directly from some previous text. And they're called quotations. And of course, they are also expressive means of a language. They are phrases that are consciously taken from literature or high oratory. Phrases that are consciously taken from literature and high oratory. And this is something that we use very much, but we maybe sometimes rarely appreciate that we use it a lot. These are snippets of conversation, scraps of phrases which we use in our speech and which are used in literary works and create this intertextuality. Well, for example, some very famous quotations from English poets. A thing of beauty is a joy forever by Keats. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. Sometimes people drop it here without finishing, when first we practice to deceive. Right? So what a tangled web we weave, this is about lying and deception. Ships that pass in the night, this is from the famous poem by Longfellow about um, lonely people. Well, and these quotations, which I'm sure you recognize from Russian classical literature. Oh, there are sometimes even literary works which are stuffed full of quotations. This is a poem by a modern poet, Carol Duffy, Mrs. Schofield's GCSE, about students having to recognize famous phrases. Let's check whether you know these allusions. Who killed his wife insane with jealousy? Othello, right. Which Scots witch knew something wicked this way comes? This comes from Macbeth, right. Who said, is this a dagger which I see? Which tragedy? This is also Macbeth. Whose blade is drawn which led to Tybalt's death? Tybalt is a character from which play? Romeo and Juliet, right. To whom did dying Caesar say et tu? To Brutus, right. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Hamlet, не все ладно в королевстве датцев. So these are allusions which English school children have to recognize. And of course, it is useful for us to recognize as well, because they're part and parcel of British culture. And finally, we conclude with one more notion which is widely researched nowadays. It is called polycode or creolised text. When text exists together with pictures. And actually, when we come to think of it, we very often see text combined with picture, right? But we just rarely recognize that they both work together. For example, the famous illustrations to famous texts like Alice in Wonderland, they they influence our understanding of the text. And of course, film adaptations of various novels, they influence our perception of novels in their own turn. Well, that's an example of just a cartoon. Right? Or, well, this is from the Daily Mail. So various newspapers have various ratio between pictures and text that they give. And this also, of course, affects how people perceive the text, right, together with the picture. And finally, allusion may be at the heart of parody of spoof. Last time we discussed parody spoof as imitation of some style with exaggeration distortion, but parody and spoof can be just based on a humorous allusion. For example, in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, there is this funny poem Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at. Up above the world you fly like a tea tray in the sky. But this is an allusion, a parody on the well-known children's poem in Lewis Carroll's Times. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high like a diamond in the sky. Right, and this is this parody. Or for example, this one. There are a whole series of texts which may be parody or spoof on something. Tanya Grotter Magический контрабас, that's of course a parody on Harry Potter, right? Harry Potter. Well, there may be visual parody as well, which in itself contains this intertextuality. For example, this parody alludes to two famous pictures, Mona Lisa and The Starry Night by Van Gogh, right? And unless you know the original, you will not be able to appreciate the parody. Well, and here I end my lecture. Thank you for your attention. Можно выключать. Спасибо.